Yesterday I was on the Senate floor talking about this piece of legislation that's now pending before the United States Senate, passed by the House of Representatives earlier this week. I am a sponsor and supporter of cut, cap, and balance, and believe that it is a path toward responsibility that we need to demonstrate here in the United States Senate, here in the Congress, and here in America. Mr. President, it seems to me that it's certainly irresponsible not to raise the debt ceiling, but it's equally or more irresponsible not to raise the debt ceiling without making adjustments in the way we do business in Washington, D.C., and clearly cutting spending is a component of that, capping spending as a portion of our national economy, returning it to the days in which, just a few years ago, in which we were spending only 18, I say only in quotes perhaps, only 18% of our gross national product by the federal government. Unfortunately, in the last few years, that 18% has grown to 25%, 24.2%. And so reducing some spending, capping that spending in the intermediate future so that it doesn't exceed a certain portion of the national economy, and finally passing a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution seems to me to be a reasonable, rational approach to solving the problems that we face. I also indicated yesterday that, in my view, there's a fourth component. It's cut, cap, balance, and grow. And I don't want us to forget the importance of a growing economy. The last time we had our budget that was in balance, close to being in balance, was at the end of the term of President Clinton. And yes, there was some spending restraint back in those days, in those years. Republicans and Democrats couldn't get together and pass major pieces of legislation that increased spending, and so that spending restraint was an important component. But the other part of that is the economy was growing, and people were working, and as a result, they were paying taxes. And that is the more enjoyable component of our work here, in addition to restraining spending, capping its percentage of the economy, and putting a balanced budget in place so that we don't get back in the mess that we're in. The other aspect of that is to make sure that we make the policy decisions here in our nation's capital that allow a business person, an employer, to make the decision, now is the time to invest in plant and equipment, now is the time to add additional employees. And yet there are so many aspects of decisions that have been made in our nation's capital over a long period of time that now come together and discourage an individual business owner and a potential employer from making the decision that I'm going to invest in the economy. We've all heard the numbers about the amount of money sitting on the sidelines in the U.S. economy. And in my view, the recession that we're in has lingered longer than necessary because there is so much uncertainty in regard to what's going to happen next. And a large portion of that uncertainty comes from the inability to predict what policy decisions are going to be made here in the United States Senate, across the hall in the House, and what the Obama administration is going to propose and potentially put in place in regard to rules and regulations. So I certainly hope that my colleagues here in the Senate will take the proposal by the House of Representatives as serious work. I certainly agree that there can be negotiations had. There's been, as I indicated yesterday, some concern about the specific language of the constitutional amendment that requires a balanced budget, and we ought not draw the line in the sand and say that it has to be exactly the way that it's written. Let's come together and work to find a reasonable, rational solution based upon the outline that this legislation provides. From time to time, it's been considered a radical piece of legislation, labeled that way. And yet so many of the things that we do in our everyday lives, that states across our nation encounter, and the way that they conduct business are certainly capsulized in cut, cap, and balance. I know there's been significant talk about raising taxes. I heard the senator from Arizona speak to this before just a few moments ago. And you know, when an individual is struggling to pay the bills, we don't often have the opportunity to ask for a pay raise. What we do at home, what we should do in our own lives, is to reduce our spending levels. And simply asking for more money to meet our current obligations is not usually an option. And it goes, that tax issue goes along with my comments just a moment ago about the importance of growing the economy. And too often we look at taxes as a source of revenue. I'm for raising revenue, but I'm for raising revenue by a growing economy and people being at work, paying those taxes, not by raising the tax rates, but by improving the economy and allowing good things to happen to families, individuals, and businesses across the country. And so that tax code is an important component of this issue of growing our economy and getting our deficit back in line, back with some level of responsible behavior here. And the additional point that I want to make, in addition to what I have said already today, but also what I said yesterday to the Senate, is this is the one-year anniversary of the passage of Dodd-Frank. Huge financial regulations were put in place by legislation just a year ago today that were passed by the House and Senate, signed by President Obama. And in my view, that legislation is another component of the difficulty in knowing what's coming down the road. Hundreds of regulations yet to be proposed, pursued, and enacted. And so many of our businesses and financial institutions don't know what to expect, and therefore, again, waiting to see what happens to the federal government, what decisions are made here, in this case not by Congress now, but by regulators up the street here in our nation's capital. And so on this anniversary of the passage of that legislation, I want to again highlight what I think is a common sense reform to that legislation. A part of Dodd-Frank created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and a number of us senators have signed a letter to President Obama trying to make clear that before a head of that bureau is going to be confirmed by the United States Senate, we believe that structural reform, change in the nature of that organization, needs to occur. And again, these seem very straightforward and common sense to me, but rather than have a single head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I would ask that, in fact, I've introduced legislation to do this, and my colleagues in signing that letter asked the President to help us change that individual to a board or commission, similar to other government agencies charged with financial oversight, so that the power does not rest in a sole individual. And then, again, one would think Congress would never want to give up the authority to determine the appropriations for this agency. And instead, the legislation, the law as currently written, provides for a draw against the Federal Reserve as compared to an agency, like almost all agencies have to come to Congress, have to come and ask for their appropriation, gives us as legislators, me as a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, as ranking member of the Financial Services Subcommittee on Appropriations, the opportunity to review, to have input, to provide oversight. And we ought to change that formula by which the money comes directly from the Federal Reserve and put it back with the responsibility of this Congress making those decisions. And finally, we want to have banking regulators who oversee the safety and soundness of our financial institutions today, that they be given meaningful input into the Bureau's operation, all designed to provide greater opportunity for us as members of Congress, for the American people, to have input and oversight over what will be one of the largest agencies, most powerful regulators in our country's history, and certainly having significant significant creation of new rules and regulations that are going to, in some fashion, affect the U.S. economy. Many of my community banks feel so overregulated today. There's a real concern or fear about making loans today, something that's very important for an economic recovery, that aspect of growing the economy, because they don't know what the next set of regulations are going to be. And in fact, for the passage of Dodd-Frank, the legislation that we are now observing the one-year anniversary of it becoming law, the GAO, our Government Accountability Office, estimates that the budgetary costs of Dodd-Frank will exceed $1.25 billion. In addition to that, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that over the next 10 years, Dodd-Frank will take $27 billion directly from the U.S. economy in new fees and assessments on lenders and other financial companies. So as we look at the legislation that's pending before us, cut, cap, and balance, my hope is that we will expand. Once we pass that legislation, we will get back to aggressively pursuing a pro-job, pro-growth agenda. And jobs certainly are important for us in generating the revenues necessary to fund the federal government and to reduce our national debt. But there's nothing more important to Americans, to Kansans across our state, than being able to have a secure opportunity for employment, to put food on their families' tables, to save for their own retirement and their children's education. And I do believe, seriously believe, that a significant message that was delivered by the American people in the election of November 2010 was the reminder to us that we have the responsibility. Again, government's not a creator of jobs, but we are the creator of an environment in which the private sector can create jobs. And so let's cut, cap, balance, grow the economy, strengthen the opportunity for every American to have a valuable and viable job with the hope of improvement in their own lives, and most importantly, make certain that we pass on to the next generation of Americans the ability to pursue that American dream.